The river was shallow but fast, cutting through the red stone canyon like an old scar that never healed, and the cowboy felt its cold bite through his boots as he stepped forward, water splashing around his legs while the sun burned low behind the cliffs. He had found the girl lying near the rocks upstream, her dress torn, her skin pale, her breathing shallow like the last flicker of a dying fire. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from, only that leaving her there would be a death sentence, and that was something his conscience wouldn't let him carry. As he lifted her into his arms, her head rolled back, dark hair falling like spilled ink, and for a moment he thought, of all the things the frontier had taken from him already, every step through the river felt heavier than the last, not just from her weight, but from the feeling that this moment mattered more than any gunfight or deal he'd ever survived. That's when he saw her, kneeling at the river's edge, wrapped in fringed buckskin, eyes sharp as flint, watching him like she had been waiting. The Apache woman didn't shout or run. She simply stood, water touching her knees, hands open, steady, and the cowboy felt something tighten in his chest. He had crossed paths with tribes before, some peaceful, some bloody, but there was something different in her gaze. Not fear, not anger, recognition. When he stepped closer, the woman saw the girl's face and let out a sound that wasn't quite a cry, wasn't quite a prayer. The canyon seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't just an injured stranger. This was her daughter. And in that frozen second, the cowboy realized that saving the girl might cost him more than bullets ever could. If this story already has your heart racing, subscribe now. Because what happens next doesn't just change their lives. It changes the meaning of mercy itself. The Apache mother waded into the river without hesitation, the cold water soaking her dress as she reached them, her hands hovering over her daughter's body as if afraid the girl might shatter at the slightest touch. The cowboy slowly lowered the girl into her arms, expecting anger, maybe even a blade, but none came. Instead, the woman closed her eyes and pressed her forehead against her daughter's, whispering words the cowboy couldn't understand, words older than the canyon walls themselves. He stood there awkwardly, hands empty now, suddenly unsure of his place in the moment, unsure if he was still a rescuer or had become a trespasser. The horses snorted behind them, shifting on the rocky shore, and the wind carried the scent of sage and wet stone. When the woman finally looked up at him, her eyes were wet but fierce, and she studied his face the way one studies a storm, measuring its danger, its truth. She spoke slowly, her voice low and steady, telling him that many men had passed this river, many had taken, many had killed, and few had ever given anything back. The cowboy tried to explain how he'd found the girl, how he hadn't meant trouble, but she raised a hand, silencing him. She didn't need excuses. She needed to know why he stopped, why he carried her, why he didn't walk away like the others. The question hit him harder than any punch. He answered honestly, saying he didn't know, only that leaving her felt wrong, and some wrongs follow a man forever. The woman studied him for a long time, then said something that made his breath catch. She said the spirits sometimes test men not with power but with helplessness, and today he had chosen correctly. Still, she warned him, choices have consequences, and kindness can open doors that violence never could. If you're feeling the weight of this moment, hit subscribe, because the next chapter reveals a truth neither of them was ready to hear. They carried the girl to a small camp hidden among cottonwood trees, where the Apache mother worked with practiced calm, cleaning wounds, setting bones, using herbs the cowboy had never seen. He watched from a respectful distance, feeling like a guest in a sacred space, aware that one wrong move could shatter the fragile trust forming between them. As night fell, the firelight painted shadows on the canyon walls, and the girl finally stirred, breathing stronger now, alive. That was when the mother turned to the cowboy and spoke the words that would change everything forever. She told him the girl had been injured while guiding a group of settlers through the canyon, protecting them from a band of raiders who would have killed everyone. She said her daughter believed peace was stronger than revenge, that bridges were worth building even when they collapsed. And then she said this: "My daughter chose to protect your people. Today you protected mine. This is how wars end." The cowboy felt something inside him break open. All his life he'd been told the world was divided, us and them, survival and surrender. But here was a woman who had lost more than he ever knew, offering not blame but balance. She placed a small beaded charm in his hand. telling him it was a symbol of shared breath. When one life saves another, both are changed. From that night on, the river was no longer a border. It was a promise. And if stories like this remind you that humanity still exists in the harshest places, subscribe to the channel, because these are the stories that deserve to be remembered. By dawn, the canyon felt different, quieter, as if it too had witnessed something sacred. The girl slept peacefully, her color returning, while the cowboy prepared to leave, unsure if he'd ever see them again. The Apache mother walked him to the river, the same place where everything had begun, and told him that stories travel faster than men. She said her people would remember him, not as a cowboy, not as an outsider, but as the man who chose compassion when no one was watching. In return, she promised safe passage through lands that had claimed countless lives before. As he mounted his horse, the cowboy realized he was riding away lighter than he'd arrived, not because his burdens were gone, but because they were finally shared. Years later, people would whisper about a river where a gun was never drawn, where a mother's words changed a man's fate, where enemies became guardians. And that is how legends are born, not from violence, but from one quiet decision to care. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you what humanity can be, subscribe now, because the next story might just change the way you see the world too.